I'm intrigued and interested because I saw a tweet yesterday, last night in fact, where someone was saying, hasn't Byron done well? 3 of the top 10 trending issues in New Zealand at the moment are you, sir. And I thought, gosh, that's interesting. Let's have a talk to Byron about why he's trending on Twitter at the moment. So first of all, how does it feel to have kind of 3 of the top 10 threads on Twitter yesterday evening trending about things you were talking about and about you yourself?
Yeah, it's pretty strange, really. I don't think I've ever trended or had something I was promoting trended. I'll have the occasional tweet that'll get really popular, but this was this was less about an individual tweet and more about just the issue being discussed by a lot of people on Twitter. I'm guessing probably even people who don't necessarily follow me or see me, for it to be trending that much. There must have been a lot that I wasn't even seeing there on the site.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, eh? So tell us the what you were actually discussing, the actual subject matter you were talking about on Twitter. What was it to get you up in those rankings so much? And actually, still, I'm looking over one of the hashtags is still at number 8 right now. Well, according to 49 minutes ago on Trends 24 New Zealand, it's still at number 8 right now. What were you actually talking about last night, and what's going on?
So there's been a bit of an escalation in the threats and harassment that I get from the far right because of the activism and journalism that I do.
Right.
I had a couple of death threats at the beginning of the month. Just anonymous emails, which they usually are. And while these sounded slightly more credible than some of the ones I've got, I mean they are still, they're just emails. It could just be somebody trying to be intimidating. And then yesterday, one of this country's probably most prominent far right activists turned up unannounced at my workplace. Walked into the office filming. Like Tommy Robinson does in the UK to target his critics. He's a big Tommy Robinson fan, so I'm guessing that's where he got the idea from.
Right.
And yeah, so I just tweeted that had happened, and a lot of people, of course, were seeing he was sharing the video he made on social media. He's not very big on Twitter, but he is on Telegram where they all hang out. So a few others heard of it independently of that, and yeah, I wasn't particularly active on Twitter after that because I was sorting out all the legal police reports and all that sort of thing. But yeah, somebody started this hashtag deport Lee Williams. I don't think he can actually be deported. I think he's a permanent resident or possibly even a citizen. But I see that was one of the ones that was trending, and yeah, there's been a real outpouring of support from people because I've got a fairly substantial following now with what I do, and I think a lot of people were really quite horrified to see this kind of escalation because we think of this as being an online phenomenon, but
Yeah.
I always say there's people at the other end of the wires, and today one of them got off the internet and into my workplace to come and intimidate me in person.
Was there something that specifically happened that caused that face-to-face interaction?
Not that I can think of. I mean, he's got his own reasons for targeting me specifically. He seems to think that I was behind a petition to his former employer that caused him to lose his job. I wasn't actually. It was two Maori women who made that petition in response to some very racist videos he did about Te Pāti Maori MPs. But he blames me for that because I'm apparently the only anti-fascist in New Zealand and responsible for any kind of anti-fascist activism that happens. I think maybe it's just that that I've laughed at him, I've made fun of him in my videos, because that's what I do with a lot of my activism. It's using humor, using entertainment to raise awareness about the far right, and I think if you talk about how offended you are and everything, they'll just laugh at that because they want to be offensive. They want to be, have people offended by them. But when you laugh at them, that seems to really upset them. And so I haven't done anything specific, even mentioning him lately. He's been
Wow.
pretty quiet, but I guess this has been boiling away for a while. And he really has, more than anyone else on the New Zealand far right, I think, suffered consequences of his actions, because his employer did sack him, not because some people started a petition and asked them to. I mean, I know that wouldn't. I'm sure that wouldn't hold up in employment court. But some of these racist rants that he was doing on YouTube, he'd done from his workplace. As with the uh, workplace in the background. And I think it was probably because of something more like that. But in the midst of all this, I understand his wife left him as well.
Huh.
He went back to the UK where he's from for a while, and then I'm only speculating, but I think he came back here because he's got a bit of a following here, which he doesn't there. And so he came back here, and he's got an audience that really love what he does, but he's been unable to find a job because one Google search for him and you see all this history of racism, and I think maybe he's escalating things because he feels like he's somebody with nothing left to lose.
It sounds like you're perhaps suggesting, or maybe you're not, maybe I'm suggesting it, that if you can monetize your presence by escalating things, then that might be a way to earn something. We said in America with big audiences, if you can grift off your audience to earn some money, if you don't have an income, that might be something someone's doing. Because you said he shared the video, so he walked into your workplace with a video. So I today went and had a look on the he's on YouTube channel, so YouTube hasn't banned him or anything. So obviously YouTube don't think he's whatever the criteria is for a danger or any of the isms that need to come with that. But I watched a video that he uploaded today, and I often, you will lose me in an argument if one of the first things you say is completely wrong. And he said this in his video today, and I wrote it down. So this is a quote from him. He was talking about Three Waters, and he was saying that, I think he said Willie Jackson, but anyway, I think it was Willie Jackson says that that ownership of the water and the infrastructure worth billions would be okay. So he said this: Māori elites owning the water and all the infrastructure worth billions. Now, there's nothing in Three Waters about ownership of water or ownership of the infrastructure, the co-governance thing. And I know some people don't like the co-governance idea, and that's a conversation for another day. But that's just completely factually wrong. And when someone starts the premise of their argument with a significant falsehood, you lose me. But also, I hope that other people have enough nous to kind of go, let's look into this ourselves as well. So I'd never heard the person's name before I saw the trending last night. So I don't know very much about him at all, other than the one video I've watched of his is based on an incredibly wrong piece of information at the very start. So that's a good sample of the information he puts out there. I can just imagine the following he does have, because we see them here sometimes, or we see them when we have on more controversial guests, like we had a right-wing commentator on last Friday from America, and all his supporters came into the chat, and you can just see there's a difference. So when you start a conversation or you try to make a fact or a point, and the factual basis of your point is completely inaccurate, it makes the whole point kind of moot. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There are some things in Three Waters that people are fine to be concerned about. I mean, there is a debate to be had about that, but there's no debate to be had about the ownership issue, because that's not a part of Three Waters. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the disinformation, isn't it? That's a misinformation that you have been researching for quite a while.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been talking about him for I guess 3 years, because he wasn't in the first video essay I made, but he was in the second, and he was in some subsequent ones because he was such a significant influencer in this space. And early on, he was trying to get me to come and have a debate with him, and I said, look, there's no debate to be had around what you're saying, because it's not that we have a different political opinion, we have a different interpretation of reality. Like, if you want to have a political debate about what the top tax rate should be, or what the minimum wage should be, you can debate that, and you can bring your different studies and things. But if you want to have a debate on like whether or not the Great Replacement is actually happening, it's not a debate. It's it's just not. And the same with some of his other conspiracy theories around. He's talked about there being like white genocide going on in South Africa, and the UN being run by a cabal of cultural Marxists and radical Islamists. And this, there's no debate to be had on that. I mean, how do you even approach that as if it's a serious political conversation? So I've
Yeah.
always I've always turned down debate with him because I think having a debate on that stuff elevates those ridiculous, uh, disinformation narratives to a level they don't deserve to be elevated to, because it puts it in as if these ideas have an equal footing with factual information. So I've always rejected that. Um,
It's a bit
but
like
yeah,
I
I
mean,
hadn't seen
as you're talking about it, I'm like, it's sort of a bit like, let's debate if water is wet. What you think water's not wet? Well, what's the point of that debate? Because
yeah,
water's wet. It's fairly obvious that
yeah,
water is wet.
exactly, yeah.
I was going to ask you as well, especially from your point of a researcher. We used to talk more in the past about like Trump supporters, and so we use that as sort of a colloquial sometimes for people on the right and people who have extreme views on the right. And
Mm,
there's that old adage that not everyone who votes for Trump is a racist, but all racists vote for Trump. So not all voters are racist, but all racists do vote for Trump.
mm,
I I wonder as well, where is the line, do you think, between, say, ignorant, ill-informed, you know, ill-educated in things, and sort of the other end of the spectrum to white supremacy? Where is that line, and how do we know where to draw that line before like making an accusation? And I know that you said before we came on, you haven't really made that accusation of this gentleman
mm, mm,
exactly, and I'm not saying we're doing that right now, but I'm just more wondering, how do we know the line between, oh, you just don't understand, you're just ignorant to this and you've got the wrong end of the stick,
mm.
versus, oh, you're a white supremacist who's actually trying to sow the seeds of white superiority across people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. So in the case of this guy, he definitely doesn't self-identify as a white supremacist. Gets incredibly angry if people even call him far right, which is the term I usually use to describe him, because uh, the people will have different definitions, but I tend to think it's not a description of an ideology. It's a description of where your politics are relative to the center. You've got right of center, you've got further right, and you've got far right, which is where you
Yeah,
get
right.
these ideas. But I think a lot of people, if they look at what he's producing around ideas of white genocide and great replacement, and a lot of his really sort of anti-Maori content, they'd probably call him a white supremacist. And I know a lot of Maori activists have, so I think it's important that we listen to what they're saying, because they're probably in a better position to judge who is and who isn't a white supremacist than I am as a white person. So, um, likely an accurate description of his ideology.
But
In terms of,
whether that's the case for him or not, how do we know
mm,
in general? Like, is there a, I mean, I'm not saying what are the three signs of a white supremacist. I'm like,
yeah,
how do we, like? Because I sometimes think if people are ignorant and ill-informed, then it's upon us a little bit to help them understand the truth. If they're in that area of
sure.
white supremacy, or whatever ism is well past, a savable sort of space, it's a very different conversation you have with that person. Because I know you're talking about debates before. I know that quite often when someone invites me to come and have a chat on one of their podcasts or conversation, or I invite them, one of the things I often say to them if I know we're in a place of disagreement is I say to them, are you prepared to change your mind? And if they
Mm,
say, no, I'm not prepared to change my mind, I know what I know, I go, well, thanks, I'm not looking for an argument. Because if you're not prepared to give a little with this conversation, then what's the point?
mm,
So yeah, anyway, so that line between sort of ignorance and active, we were talking about white supremacy, so active white supremacy,
mm.
how do we know and what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, because there are a lot of people getting caught up in this disinformation, and wider than white supremacy. There's all the COVID misinformation, and like climate change disinformation, all sorts of things, and they all often kind of, it's an overlapping Venn diagram. A lot of this stuff,
Yeah.
um, with um, with a lot of the people who are watching Lee's videos on YouTube and now on Telegram, maybe they're just starting to get pulled into that. And part of the reason I do my own videos on looking at these ideas and criticizing them and laughing at them is that there will be people out there who watch both these content creators and watch my content, and they might then, you know, maybe form an opinion differently than if they only watched one side of that debate. So, you know, people can be prevented from going down that pathway. I think prevention's a lot better than trying to pull them out once they've gone all the way in. That
Yep.
seems to be what the research indicates as well. Um, not that it's impossible for people to leave that kind of far right or white supremacist space, but from the evidence I've seen, there it's similar to leaving a cult. Like, you can't just convince someone to leave a cult, but when they're starting to question it, when they themselves ready to leave, you can help them with leaving. But if they're not themselves ready to leave, it's a much harder thing to do.
Yeah, in a different life, I run a podcast, but you've been on the other podcast as well. I had on a
Hmm.
guy in the first year I was doing that, so probably in 2019, called Christian Picciolini, and he's a very famous former Nazi and white supremacist from America, and he is out of that life now, and he spends his life trying to get others out. And I did a podcast with him not long
Okay.
after the Christchurch massacre. Maybe it'd be a good time
Mm.
for me to repost that around this sort of time while stuff's going on. I don't know.
Mm.
Maybe I will. There are people in the chat who are checking up on you. You know, John says, "Hope you're okay." Lots of people saying
Thanks,
it's not fair. What's going on? Are you okay? Are you safe? Is there any concerns for your safety at the moment?
I'm safe. He's been trespassed from my office. I'm in the process of a restraining order. There's a lot of paperwork to do, and then a court date. One thing incidents like this highlights, a lot of people are quite shocked that what he's done isn't actually a crime,
Right.
because he wasn't trespassed and I didn't have a restraining order. Um, so, you know, there's not a lot that can there's nothing really he can be charged with. It becomes a civil court thing, and I think it highlights some real gaps in the law that we have to protect people from harassment. In like domestic violence cases, you can get a sort of emergency protection order, um, but with a civil dispute, like I mean, dispute seems like too light a word, but with a civil law thing like this, I mean, it's a very slow process. And when you've got things escalating, because of course he's encouraging all his followers to now contact my work and try and get me fired, and even turn up there or turn up outside. But once I file the court papers, it'll probably be a few months before it goes before a judge, and
Right.
a lot can escalate in that time. So
Mm.
it's highlighting that issue, but hopefully, you know, maybe going through this whole process, um, something I'd like to, you know, probably in discussion with other people who are victims of this sort of stuff. You know, talk about what going forward, if there's some different legislation we need, if we need to look at whether some of that stuff we have around domestic violence could be brought into harassment, because I think our civil stuff around restraining orders and things, it's all from a pre-social media time, a time pre-Gamergate and all this stuff. And you know, technology is often um, moving very fast, and the law moves very slow behind it. So, you know, that's something I hope to maybe get out of this, if we can start working out exactly what laws we need there, and thinking about that. It's like, well, you know, better me, I guess, than, you know, somebody else being victimized by
Yeah.
this. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only person who gets targeted like this. I think I'm just a lot more public with what I do, and I always try and make the point as well. Like, I'm targeted because I'm an activist, and that's a decision I've made, knowing that there are risks. There are other people who don't have the privilege of getting to make that decision, because there are people being targeted because of their religion or their ethnicity or their sexuality or gender identity, and you know, it's always important to remember that side of it too.
All right. Well, listen, Byron, thanks for joining us this evening just to tell us what's going on. I know that
Thanks for
you're
having
out
me
for
on.
the evening, so we don't want to hold you up for too long. There's a bunch of messages that have come in. I'll get to all of those once we say goodbye to you. But thanks
Well,
again. Be safe. And
thank you.
yeah, keep us up to date with what's going on, and we'll let others know as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right, all the best, Byron. Thanks very much. Now, remember, if you want to participate, you can. The chats are open. And also remember, the super chats are open as well. A-Hole says, deport him anyway. Mike says it's a really concerning escalation and really worrying that one of his more unhinged followers tried to push the envelope. Go Away says, the fact that white supremacists still exist in 2022 is mind-blowing. Paul says, I'm sorry that you had him crash your workplace and be stink, Brian. He's just exposing his nonsense and undoing himself. Lots of laugh out louds. I think John wrote this good point when I was talking about the Three Waters thing. What else have we got in there? Another message directly for Byron. Kia kaha, Brian, from Cross the Road to Avoid. Tessa says, strange that his followers like to threaten and incite violence. Ludwig says, as I said to Byron, I didn't know this person's name before last night. I heard he drinks sherry and recites Mussolini speeches to his budriagar. There you go. And Tessa says, I subscribed and appreciate the dialogue.